The knock on my door came at 6:47 on a Thursday evening. I remember the exact time because I'd just turned off the local news and was heading to the kitchen to heat up the leftover meatloaf from Tuesday. The sound made me freeze mid-step, one hand still on the remote control, the other gripping the arm of my worn blue recliner. I wasn't expecting anyone. At 73 years old, living alone in my small ranch house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa, unexpected visitors were rare and usually meant someone was selling something I didn't need or want. My knees creaked as I stood, a sound I'd grown accustomed to over the years, just another reminder that time kept marching forward whether I wanted it to or not. Through the peephole, I could see a tall man standing on my porch. He looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair and broad shoulders, wearing a navy blue jacket despite the mild September weather. Something about the way he stood there, shifting his weight from foot to foot, hands shoved deep in his pockets, made my heart skip in a way I couldn't quite explain. I opened the door with the chain still attached, just a crack, the way women my age learn to do when living alone. "Can I help you?" The man's eyes met mine, and I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. They were hazel, flecked with gold around the edges, and they held something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, hope, fear. "Mrs. Henderson?" His voice cracked slightly on my name. "Dorothy Henderson? That's me." I kept my voice steady, though my hand trembled slightly on the doorframe. "Do I know you?" He took a deep breath, and I watched his chest rise and fall beneath that jacket. I think you're my grandmother. My name is Michael. I think I'm your grandson, Mikey." The remote control clattered to the floor. 25 years. 25 years of searching, of hoping, of waking up in the middle of the night with his name on my lips. 25 years of watching every dark-haired little boy in grocery stores, parks, shopping malls, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this one could be him. And now, here he stood, no longer 5 years old with scraped knees and a gap-toothed smile, but a grown man who claimed to be the child I'd lost to the worst kind of darkness a family can know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I can tell you about that Thursday evening that changed everything, before I can explain how we ended up at my door after a quarter-century of silence and searching, I need to take you back. Back to when life was simpler, when my biggest worry was whether Becca would ever find a decent man to settle down with, and when the idea that someone could steal a child and vanish into thin air seemed like something that only happened to other families in other towns. You know, they say a grandmother's love is special, different from any other kind. I never understood that until Becca placed that tiny, wrinkled baby in my arms 30 years ago. Michael James Henderson, born on a cold March morning in 1995, 7 pounds, 3 ounces of pure miracle. I'd been 43 then, too young to be a grandmother by some standards, but the moment I looked into those hazel eyes, I knew my life had changed forever. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you're listening to this story, if you've made it this far, would you do me a small favor? Hit that like button and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It might seem like a small thing, but it helps this channel reach other grandmothers, other families who might be going through their own struggles. These stories we share, they're free, they're real, and they remind us we're not alone in this world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Ring that bell so you don't miss any of these real stories from real grandmas. Your support means everything and helps us grow this community of listeners who understand that life's hardest moments often lead to our greatest strengths. Thank you for being here with me today. My name is Dorothy Henderson, though most folks call me Dot, and I've lived in Cedar Falls, Iowa, for the better part of 50 years. This town sits in the northeast part of the state, where the Cedar River winds through farmland and small neighborhoods, and where everybody still knows everybody else's business, for better or worse. I moved here in 1975 with my late husband, George. Fresh out of our wedding in Des Moines, both of us young and foolish enough to think love and hard work could conquer anything. George worked at the John Deere plant for 32 years, coming home every evening smelling of machine oil and metal, his hands permanently stained despite the industrial soap he scrubbed them with. I worked as a secretary at Cedar Falls High School, typing up reports and answering phones, watching generations of teenagers flow through those hallways like rivers finding their way to the ocean. We weren't rich, not by a long shot. Our house on Maple Street was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with brown siding that needed repainting every few years, and a kitchen with avocado green appliances that were outdated even when we bought the place. But we were happy. We had enough. The mortgage got paid, there was always food on the table, and once a year we'd take a vacation to the Wisconsin Dells, or sometimes Lake Okoboji if we'd saved up enough. Life had a rhythm to it, predictable and steady as George's footsteps coming up the driveway every evening at 5:15. We were blessed with one child, our daughter Rebecca, born in 1972 after 3 years of trying and one miscarriage that nearly broke my heart. Becca was a beautiful baby, all dark curls and rosy cheeks, and she grew into a spirited little girl who kept us on our toes. She was smart as a whip, brought home straight A's without even trying, and had a stubborn streak a mile wide that she got from George's side of the family, though he'd never admit it. The house was always full during Becca's childhood. She had friends over constantly, their laughter echoing through the rooms, bicycles scattered across the front lawn, the screen door slamming as kids ran in and out for glasses of lemonade and homemade cookies. I'd stand at the kitchen window watching them play in the backyard, George pushing them on the tire swing he'd hung from the old oak tree, and I'd think to myself that this was what life was supposed to be. Becca graduated from Cedar Falls High in 1990, the same high school where I worked. I'd see her in the hallways between classes, surrounded by her friends, beautiful and confident in a way I'd never been at that age. She'd wave at me sometimes. "Hi, Mom," shouted across the corridor, and I'd wave back, proud, but trying not to embarrass her too much. Mothers and daughters, we walk that fine line, don't we? She went to the University of Northern Iowa, just a few miles away, studying business administration. She lived at home to save money, and honestly, I was grateful. I wasn't ready to have an empty nest, though I'd never have admitted that to her. Those college years flew by in a blur of textbooks spread across the dining room table, late-night study sessions fueled by coffee and determination, and her growing excitement about the future that waited beyond the borders of our small Iowa town. That's where she met Derek Morrison. He was a transfer student from Illinois, tall and handsome in that clean-cut way that mothers are supposed to approve of. Dark hair always neatly combed, pressed shirts, polite manners. He'd show up at our door to pick Becca up for dates, shaking George's hand firmly, calling me ma'am, in a respectful tone that seemed genuine enough at the time. "What do you think of him?" George asked me one night after Derek had taken Becca to a movie. We were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some forgettable sitcom, but neither of us really watching. I'd paused, considering. "He seems nice enough, good manners, treats her well." But George knew me too well. "No but, I don't know. There's something I can't quite put my finger on." I'd shrugged, dismissing my own instincts as a mother being overprotective. "I'm probably just not ready to share her with anyone." George had laughed, pulling me close on the couch. "Well, get ready, Dot. That boy looks at her like she hung the moon." He wasn't wrong. Derek pursued Becca with single-minded determination, bringing her flowers, taking her to nice restaurants when they could afford it, talking about their future together with the kind of certainty that swept her right off her feet. They got engaged in December of 1993, right before Christmas, and I can still remember the way Becca's hand shook when she showed me the ring. A modest diamond that caught the light from our Christmas tree. They married in June of 1994, a small ceremony at the First Presbyterian Church downtown. Becca was 22, Derek 24. I wore a pale blue dress I'd bought at JCPenney and cried through the entire ceremony, though whether they were tears of joy or some unnamed worry, I couldn't have said. George squeezed my hand during the vows, his own eyes misty, and I forced myself to smile. The early days of their marriage seemed happy enough from the outside. They rented a small apartment on the east side of town, not far from where Derek had gotten a job as a loan officer at Community Bank. Becca got hired as an office manager at a local insurance company, and they seemed to be building the kind of life young couples are supposed to build. Sunday dinners at our house became a regular thing. Derek always polite, always helpful, offering to clear dishes or help George with some project in the garage. But there were small things, little moments that stuck in my mind like burrs on a wool sweater. The way Derek's jaw would tighten when Becca talked too long on the phone with her girlfriends. How he'd steer conversations away from her job accomplishments, subtly shifting focus back to himself. The time I stopped by their apartment, unannounced, and Becca had a bruise on her upper arm that she explained away as bumping into a doorframe. I didn't say anything. God help me. I didn't say a word. This was the mid-90s in small-town Iowa, and we didn't talk about things like that as openly as people do now. We believed in privacy, in not interfering in a married couple's business. I told myself I was seeing problems where there were none, that every marriage had its rough patches, that Becca was a grown woman who could handle her own life. Then Michael came along, and everything changed. Becca called me at work on a March morning in 1995, her voice high and breathless with joy. "Mom, I'm pregnant!" The whole office heard me squeal, and I didn't even care. My baby was having a baby, and the world suddenly seemed full of possibility and hope. Michael James was born on March 15, 1995, at Allen Hospital right here in Cedar Falls. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and those hazel eyes that seemed to look right through you even when he was just hours old. I held him in the hospital room, Becca exhausted but glowing in the bed. Derek pacing near the window with a nervous energy I'd come to recognize, and I made a silent promise to that tiny baby that I would always be there for him, no matter what. And I meant it. Oh, how I meant it. George and I were hands-on grandparents from day one. We babysat at least twice a week, sometimes more, giving Becca and Derek time to themselves. Not that they always used it well. I'd arrive at their apartment to find tension thick enough to cut with a knife, Becca's eyes red like she'd been crying, Derek's jaw set in that way that made me uneasy. But the moment I took Mikey in my arms, all of that faded into the background. That little boy became the center of my universe, in a way I hadn't expected. We had a special bond right from the start. He'd calm down instantly when I held him, his little fist wrapping around my finger with surprising strength. As he grew from infant to toddler, our connection only deepened. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Becca would drop him off at our house before work, and those mornings became sacred time. I can still picture him at 2 years old, standing on a chair at my kitchen counter, helping me make chocolate chip cookies. Flour everywhere, chocolate smeared on his cheeks, that gap-toothed grin that could light up the darkest day. Gamma Dot, he'd call me, unable to quite manage Grandma yet, and my heart would swell so big I thought it might burst right out of my chest. George adored him too. He'd retired from John Deere in 1994, and having Mikey around gave him a new purpose. He built a sandbox in the backyard, spent hours pushing that little boy on the swings, taught him to throw a ball before Mikey could even walk steadily. On summer evenings, I'd watch them from the kitchen window, George's patience endless as he helped Mikey water the tomato plants or hunt for worms in the garden. Meanwhile, the cracks in Becca and Derek's marriage were spreading, becoming harder to ignore. Becca started calling me more often, late at night after Mikey was asleep, her voice strained and tired. Derek was working longer hours, she said. He was stressed about money. He didn't help with the baby as much as he should. The excuses piled up, each one a brick in a wall she was building between the truth and what she was willing to admit. I wanted to push, to demand answers, to ask the hard questions a mother should ask. But I was afraid of driving her away, of making things worse, of being the interfering mother-in-law everyone complains about. So I listened, I offered comfort, and I kept my mouth shut about the suspicions growing louder in my mind. By the time Mikey turned 4 in March of 1999, things had deteriorated to a point where even denial couldn't hide it. Becca showed up at our house one Saturday morning, Mikey in tow, with a suitcase and tears streaming down her face. Derek had screamed at her the night before, she said, thrown a glass that shattered against the wall near her head. She couldn't do it anymore. She was done. George and I moved them into our guest bedroom that same day. The room had sat mostly empty for years, just a place to store Christmas decorations and old boxes of Becca's school papers, but we cleared it out and made it into a temporary home. Mikey got the twin bed, and Becca slept on an air mattress we bought from Walmart. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe, and for the first time in months, I could sleep at night, knowing they were under our roof, protected. Derek showed up 2 days later, apologetic and smooth-talking, with flowers and promises. He'd been stressed, he said. Work was difficult. He'd never meant to scare her. It would never happen again. Please, come home. We could go to counseling. He'd do anything. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Becca wavered, her resolve crumbling under the weight of his words and her own hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. She went back after a week. George and I stood in our empty guest bedroom, staring at the bare mattress and the toys Mikey had left scattered on the floor, and I felt a cold dread settle deep in my bones. "We can't let this happen again," George said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Next time she needs to leave, it has to be for good." There would be a next time. We both knew it. What we didn't know was that when it came, the cost would be higher than we could have ever imagined. For the next year, from spring of 1999 through early 2000, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Becca stayed with Derek, but she was different now, quieter. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a wariness that broke my heart. She brought Mikey over less often, and when she did, she seemed nervous, checking her watch constantly, cutting visits short. Derek started calling more often, checking on her whereabouts. "Just wanted to see if you'd heard from Becca," he'd say smoothly, his voice casual but with an edge underneath that made my skin crawl. "She said she was stopping by your place, but I wanted to make sure she's okay." I learned to lie smoothly. "Oh, yes, she just left. You must have just missed her call." Anything to buy Becca a few extra minutes of peace, of breathing room, of time to just be herself without someone watching her every move. George and I talked about it endlessly. Late-night conversations in our bedroom, his hand in mine, both of us trying to figure out what to do. Should we confront Derek? Should we beg Becca to leave again? Should we call the police, though we had no proof of anything illegal, just a mother's instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong? "We can't force her," George would say, frustration and helplessness clear in every word. "She has to make this decision herself." "But what about Mikey?" I'd counter, my voice breaking. "What if Derek hurts him?" Becca would never let that happen. She'd leave first. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But there was a knowing deep in my gut, the kind of knowing that comes from being a woman who's watched other women make impossible choices when they're trapped between fear and hope. Mikey turned 5 in March of 2000. We threw him a party at our house, his favorite Superman theme, complete with a cake I'd spent hours decorating with blue and red frosting. Derek came with Becca, playing the role of doting father, taking pictures, helping Mikey open presents. To anyone watching, we looked like a normal, happy family. But I could see the tension in Becca's shoulders, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, the grateful look she shot me when I suggested Mikey stay overnight with us after the party. "Are you sure?" she asked, already knowing I was. "Of course. It's his birthday. We'll spoil him rotten and bring him home tomorrow afternoon." Derek frowned slightly, but didn't argue. Maybe he wanted time alone with Becca. Maybe he didn't want to seem like the bad guy in front of relatives. I didn't care about his reasons. I just cared about having my grandson safe under my roof for one more night. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I gave Mikey his bath and tucked him into the guest bed. He was tired from all the excitement, his eyelids drooping as I read him his favorite story about a little engine that could climb a big mountain. His small hand held mine, and I memorized every detail. The way his hair curled slightly when it was damp, the constellation of freckles across his nose, the sound of his breathing as it slowed and deepened into sleep. I sat there for a long time after he'd dozed off, just watching him, that cold dread from months ago settling even deeper into my chest. Something was coming. I could feel it the way you can feel a storm building on the horizon, the air pressure changing, the sky taking on a greenish tint that means you better get to shelter soon. George found me there an hour later, still sitting beside Mikey's bed in the dark. "Come to bed, Dot," he said gently. "He's fine. He's safe." For tonight, I thought. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about all the years stretching ahead of us, with Becca still tied to a man who was slowly suffocating the life out of her? The next morning was a Saturday. I made Mikey's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream, and we spent the morning playing in the backyard. The weather was perfect, that early spring warmth that promises better days ahead, though the nights still got cold enough to need a jacket. Mikey dug in his sandbox while I planted petunias in the flower bed, both of us content in our separate tasks, but together in that way that doesn't need words. Around 2 p.m, the phone rang. It was Becca, and something in her voice made me straighten up immediately. "Mom? Can Mikey stay another night? Derek and we need to talk about some things." My hand tightened on the phone. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay?" A long pause. Too long. "I'm going to ask him for a divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm doing it today, while I have the courage." My heart stopped. "Becca, please be careful. Maybe you should do this in a public place, or wait until we can be there." "I have to do this now, Mom, before I lose my nerve. Just keep Mikey there. Keep him safe. I'll call you later." The line went dead before I could argue. I stood there holding the phone, that storm I'd felt building now, crackling with electricity, so close I could taste the ozone in the air. George saw my face and came over immediately. "What's wrong?" "She's asking him for a divorce, today, right now." We stared at each other, both thinking the same thing. This was either the beginning of Becca's freedom or the moment everything fell apart. There was no middle ground left. Hours passed. 3, then 4, then 5. Mikey ate dinner, watched a cartoon, asked when Mommy was coming. "Soon," I told him, forcing my voice to stay light and cheerful. "Mommy's just taking care of some grown-up stuff. You get to have another sleepover with Gamma and Grandpa." He seemed satisfied with that answer, but I wasn't. By 8 o'clock, with still no word from Becca, I was pacing the living room, calling her number over and over. Each time it went straight to voicemail. Derek's phone did the same. "Maybe they're just talking it through," George offered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe they went to counseling or something." At 9:30 my phone finally rang. Becca's number lit up the screen, and I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. "Becca? Are you okay?" But it wasn't Becca's voice on the other end. It was Derek's, and it was calm. Too calm. Controlled in a way that made every hair on my body stand on end. "Dorothy. Hi. Is Mikey there? Where's Becca? Let me talk to Becca." "She's fine. She's just upset right now. Look, we talked, and we've decided to work things out. But I think it would be good if I picked up Mikey tonight. We want to be together as a family." Everything in me screamed no. Every instinct, every fiber of my being knew, with absolute certainty, that I should not let this man anywhere near my grandson right now. But what could I say? He was Mikey's father. Legally, I had no right to keep him. "It's late, Derek. Mikey's already in his pajamas, almost asleep. Why don't you come get him in the morning? I'd really prefer to get him tonight. We're his parents, Dorothy. You can't keep him from us. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. My hands shook as I gripped the phone. Derek, I want to talk to Becca first. Put her on the phone. She doesn't want to talk right now. She's resting. I'll be there in 20 minutes to pick up my son. The line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind racing through options. Should I refuse to answer the door? Should I call the police, though Derek hadn't technically done anything illegal? Should I take Mikey and run? Though where would we go? George put his hands on my shoulders. What do we do? I don't know. God help me. I don't know. When Derek's car pulled up 23 minutes later, I'd made my decision. I'd packed Mikey's bag, gotten him dressed, and was holding him in the living room. My 5-year-old grandson, half asleep against my shoulder, completely unaware that the world was about to tilt on its axis. The knock came. George went to answer it while I held Mikey tighter, breathing in his little boy smell of soap and sunshine. Derek stood in the doorway, and I searched his face for signs of what had happened with Becca. He looked composed, his shirt clean, his hair combed, too composed for a man who'd just had his wife ask for a divorce. Hey, buddy, Derek said, his voice warm as he approached Mikey. Ready to go home with Daddy? Mikey stirred, lifting his head from my shoulder. Where's Mommy? She's at home waiting for you. Come on, let's go. I should have held on. I should have refused. I should have demanded to know where Becca was, insisted on calling the police, something, anything. But I didn't. I let Derek take my grandson from my arms, watched him walk out our door into the dark Iowa night, and told myself that everything would be okay. It was the last time I saw Michael for 25 years, the last time I held him, heard his voice, felt his small hand in mine. And by the time I realized what had happened, by the time the truth came crashing down around us, it was far too late to do anything but watch helplessly as my family shattered into pieces that would take a quarter century to even begin putting back together. The first warning sign came the next morning, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. It was a Sunday, and Becca always called me Sunday mornings, always. We'd talk while she made breakfast, catching up on the week, making plans for her to bring Mikey over. The ritual was as fixed as church bells, but that Sunday, the phone stayed silent. By noon, I'd called her cell phone 6 times, straight to voicemail every time. I called their landline, and it rang and rang, echoing through what I imagined was an empty apartment. Derek's phone went to voicemail too. Maybe they went out for breakfast, George suggested, seeing my agitation. Family time, remember? Derek said they wanted to be together. I tried to believe that. Tried to imagine Becca and Derek and Mikey at the pancake house on Main Street, sharing a meal, talking through their problems like rational adults. But the knot in my stomach only tightened. By Monday morning, when Becca didn't show up for work and wasn't answering any calls, I drove to their apartment. It was a plain 2-story building on the east side of town, the kind of place young couples rent when they're just starting out. I'd been there dozens of times, knew which window was their bedroom, which was Mikey's small room with the space-themed curtains I'd helped Becca hang. I knocked on their door. No answer. Knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. The apartment manager happened to be walking by, an older man named Carl who I'd chatted with before during visits. Excuse me, Carl? Have you seen the Morrisons? I'm Becca's mother. He scratched his head, thinking. Yeah, actually. Saw Derek loading up his car late Saturday night. Looked like he was packing for a trip, suitcases and boxes and such. The world tilted. Loading up. What do you mean? What kind of car? That blue sedan he drives. Had the trunk open, back seat full. I asked if he needed help, but he said he was fine, just taking some stuff to storage. Storage. The word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. Did you see Becca? Or little Mikey? Nope, just Derek. He was in a hurry, though, kept checking his watch. I thanked Carl with a voice that didn't sound like my own and went back to my car. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. Storage, loading up the car. Saturday night, just hours after Derek had picked up Mikey from our house. I drove straight to Becca's workplace, Community Insurance on First Avenue. Her boss, a pleasant woman named Margaret who I'd met at company picnics, looked confused when I asked to see my daughter. She called in sick this morning, Mrs. Henderson, said she had a terrible flu and would be out for a few days. She called you? What time? Margaret checked her notes. Around 7:30. Sounded terrible, actually. Could barely talk. I told her to take all the time she needs. I left the office in a daze. Becca had called in sick, but she wasn't answering my calls. Derek had been loading his car in the middle of the night. Mikey was gone, my daughter was gone, and every instinct in my body screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. George was waiting when I got home, the worry on his face matching my own. Did you find them? No. George, I think Derek took them. I think he's taken them somewhere. Let's call the police. We did. Officer Bradley from the Cedar Falls Police Department came to our house that afternoon, a young man with kind eyes who took notes as I explained everything. The divorce conversation, Derek's strange phone call, the late-night packing, Becca's absence. Mrs. Henderson, I understand you're worried, but there's no evidence of a crime here. Derek is Mikey's father. He has every legal right to take his son places. And Becca called in to work herself, so she's clearly with them. But she won't answer my calls. That could mean she needs some space. Maybe they went away for a few days to work on their marriage. Did you consider that? I wanted to scream. Wanted to grab this young officer by his pressed uniform and shake him until he understood that mothers know when something is wrong with their children. But I could see in his eyes that he thought I was an overreacting mother-in-law, probably interfering where I didn't belong. If you don't hear from her by the end of the week, call us again, Officer Bradley said, standing to leave. But I really think they're just taking some family time. He was gone before I could argue further. George put his arm around my shoulders as I stood at the window, watching the patrol car pull away. We'll give it a few more days, he said quietly. If she doesn't call by Wednesday, we'll go back to the police. We'll demand they take us seriously. But Becca didn't call Wednesday. She didn't call Thursday or Friday either. By the following Monday, a full week after Derek had picked up Mikey from our house, I was back at the police station, this time with more information. Their apartment was empty, completely empty. Carl, the manager, had let me in after I'd begged him, worried that something might have happened inside. The furniture was gone, the closets bare, every trace of their lives packed up and removed. The only things left were some wire hangers in the bedroom closet and a grocery store circular on the kitchen counter, dated the week before. They broke their lease, Carl told me, shaking his head. Left me a note saying they had to move for Derek's work, paid the penalty fee and everything, all legal and above board. This time, the police took me more seriously. Detective Sarah Morrison, no relation to Derek despite the shared last name, sat across from me in a gray interview room and went through everything again. And you're saying you haven't heard from your daughter at all? Not even a text message? Nothing. It's been 9 days. That's not like Becca. She calls me every day, sometimes twice a day. She would never just disappear without telling me where she was going. What about Derek's work? Have you contacted them? I had. Community Bank had been my next stop after discovering the empty apartment. Derek's supervisor, a balding man named Kent, had been apologetic, but unhelpful. Derek gave his notice 2 weeks ago, said he had a job opportunity out of state. His last day was Friday before last. I assumed Becca knew. 2 weeks. Derek had been planning this for at least 2 weeks, probably longer. While Becca was gathering courage to ask for a divorce, he was already 3 steps ahead, packing up their lives, arranging to disappear. Detective Morrison's expression had shifted from skeptical to concerned. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to open a missing persons case for both Rebecca and Michael. We'll need recent photos, detailed descriptions, any information you have about Derek's family or friends. Finally, someone was listening. But even as relief flooded through me, I knew we were already so far behind. 9 days was an eternity when someone wanted to disappear. Derek could be anywhere by now. Another state, another country, anywhere. The investigation started officially on March 27, 2000. I remember the date because it was 12 days after Mikey's 5th birthday party, 12 days since I'd last held my grandson, last heard his voice calling me Gamma Dot. Detective Morrison was thorough and professional, but even her best efforts hit wall after wall. Derek's car was found abandoned in a Chicago parking garage 5 days later. Wiped clean, no evidence inside except some McDonald's wrappers and a child's coloring book that broke my heart when I saw it in a photo. The car had been reported by parking enforcement, towed, and sat in an impound lot for 3 days before someone connected it to the missing persons case. Chicago is a major transportation hub, Detective Morrison explained gently. He could have taken a bus, train, or plane from there. We're checking all the records, but if he used fake IDs... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We all knew what it meant. Derek had planned this carefully, meticulously. He'd had weeks to prepare while we were all focused on Becca's courage to leave him, while we thought we were protecting Mikey by keeping him at our house that extra night. That extra night. The thought haunted me. If I'd refused to let Derek take Mikey that Saturday, would any of this have happened? Would Derek have still run, but without his son? Would Becca have called us, safe, able to start divorce proceedings with Mikey, protected at our house? The what-ifs nearly destroyed me. Weeks turned into months. Detective Morrison kept working the case, but leads dried up like puddles in July heat. Derek's family in Illinois claimed they hadn't heard from him. His former co-workers knew nothing. His bank accounts had been closed, his credit cards unused. He'd vanished as completely as if he'd never existed, taking my daughter and grandson with him into the void. By summer, I was calling Detective Morrison every single day. Anything new? Any leads? Any sightings? Always the same answer, delivered with increasing gentleness. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson, nothing yet, but we're still looking. I promise you, we haven't given up. But I could hear it in her voice. She was moving on to newer cases, fresher leads, missing persons who had been gone days instead of months. The trail was ice cold, and everyone except George and me seemed to be accepting that Becca and Mikey might never be found. George tried to stay strong for both of us, but I could see the toll it was taking. He'd aged 10 years and 3 months, his face drawn, his eyes hollow. We'd converted Mikey's room, the one he slept in during overnight visits, into a shrine. His toys still scattered on the shelves, his clothes in the dresser, his Superman bedspread still tucked in just the way he liked it. I couldn't bear to change anything, convinced that any day now he'd come walking through that door asking for cookies and a story. The second warning sign, the one I should have paid attention to back when it mattered, had been Derek's increasing control over Becca's movements in the months before the disappearance. I replayed every conversation, every visit, looking for clues I'd missed. There was the time in January when Becca had mentioned wanting to take Mikey to visit her friend Sarah in Des Moines for the weekend. Derek had shut it down immediately, saying it wasn't safe to drive in winter weather, that Mikey might get sick, that weekends were family time. I'd thought he was being overprotective. Now I knew he was keeping her isolated, cutting off her connections, making sure she had nowhere to run when he was ready to execute his plan. Or the time in February when I'd suggested Becca apply for a better-paying job I'd heard about at the university. She'd gotten excited, started talking about the possibilities, and then suddenly deflated. Derek thinks I should focus on being a mom right now, maybe when Mikey's older. The light had gone out of her eyes as she said it, and I'd felt a flash of anger that I'd swallowed down. Not wanting to cause problems in their marriage, not wanting to cause problems. The phrase made me sick now. I should have caused problems. I should have stormed in there and demanded that Becca stand up for herself, that she leave Derek before it was too late. But I'd been raised to believe in marriage, in working things out, in not interfering. And that belief had cost me everything. The third warning sign had been Derek's sudden interest in their finances. Becca had mentioned in passing one day that Derek wanted to consolidate their bank accounts, move everything into his name to simplify things for tax purposes. She'd seemed uncertain about it, but he'd convinced her it made sense, that it was what married couples did. He was cutting off her access to money, making sure she couldn't leave even if she wanted to. And I just nodded along, thinking it was a normal marital discussion, never imagining that Derek was building a cage around my daughter one bar at a time. The fourth warning sign was his insistence that Becca add him to the title of her car, the little Honda Civic she'd bought before they got married. "It's safer," he'd explained when I'd asked about it during a Sunday dinner. "If something happens to one of us, the other can handle things more easily." Becca had gone along with it, trusting him, loving him, believing the man she'd married had her best interests at heart. He sold that car 2 days before they disappeared. I found out later from a dealer in Waterloo. Sold it for cash, no paper trail, no way to trace where the money went. The fifth warning sign should have been obvious, but it wasn't until I was sitting in Detective Morrison's office going through everything for the 100th time that it clicked into place. Derek had been asking Mikey questions. Innocent-sounding questions that weren't innocent at all. Becca had mentioned it once, laughing about how Derek was suddenly so curious about Mikey's routine. What did Mikey like to eat? What were his favorite activities? What made him happy or sad? What did he call different family members? She'd thought Derek was finally bonding with their son, taking an interest in being a more involved father. But Derek wasn't bonding. He was preparing. He was learning everything he needed to know to take Mikey and run, to keep a 5-year-old compliant and calm while his whole world was turned upside down. The thought made me physically ill. The sixth warning sign was Derek's sudden interest in Becca's medical history, particularly around allergies and medications. He'd asked her to make a list of Mikey's vaccination records, his pediatrician's information, any medical issues he'd had. "Just in case something happens and we need it," he'd said. Becca had thought it was responsible parenting. It was identity preparation, gathering everything Derek would need to create new medical records under a new name in a new place. The seventh warning sign, and the one that haunts me most, was the change in how Derek talked about the future. Looking back through my memories, I realized that sometime around February, Derek had stopped talking about long-term plans in Cedar Falls. No more mentions of buying a house someday, or where Mikey might go to kindergarten, or their 5-year plan. He'd started speaking in vagaries. "Wherever life takes us," and "we'll see what happens," and other phrases that sounded philosophical but were actually him preparing everyone for a sudden departure. The eighth and final warning sign was Derek's request that Becca update her passport and get one for Mikey, just in case we ever want to take a family vacation. She'd been excited about it, started planning a possible trip to Canada to visit Niagara Falls, but the passports had disappeared with them, and I knew with sick certainty that Derek had used them to leave the country, to take my daughter and grandson somewhere I'd never find them. 8 warning signs, 8 moments when I could have, should have, done something. 8 opportunities I'd missed because I'd believed the best of people, because I'd trusted that parents don't hurt their own children, that husbands don't kidnap their wives. I was wrong about all of it. By fall of 2000, 6 months after they'd vanished, I'd thrown myself completely into searching. I created flyers with Mikey's picture, his sweet 5-year-old face smiling under the word missing. I plastered them in every town within 200 miles. I contacted national missing children organizations, learned about parental abduction cases, joined support groups full of other grandparents and parents living the same nightmare. The support groups helped and hurt in equal measure. We'd sit in church basements or community centers, sharing our stories, crying together, holding on to hope that was more pain than comfort. I met a woman from Minnesota whose daughter had been taken by an ex-husband 8 years earlier. 8 years, and she was still searching, still hoping, still believing she'd find them someday. "You can't give up," she told me, gripping my hands with fierce intensity. "The moment you give up is the moment they win. Keep looking, keep fighting. Never stop." I didn't plan to, but the constant searching, the endless dead ends, the way every dark-haired little boy I saw in public made my heart stop, then shatter when I realized it wasn't Mikey. It was taking a toll that I couldn't sustain. George tried to get me to slow down, to accept that we might never find them. "We have to keep living, Dot. We can't let this destroy us." But it was destroying us. Our marriage, rock solid for 30 years, started showing cracks under the pressure. I blamed him for not seeing the signs with Derek. He blamed me for not being more forceful about Becca leaving earlier. We circled each other in our small house like wounded animals, both hurting too much to comfort each other effectively. Christmas of 2000 was unbearable. Mikey's present sat under our tree, wrapped and ready, a Spider-Man action figure and a set of books and new winter boots because kids grew so fast at that age. I couldn't take them back, couldn't admit that he wouldn't be there to open them. So they sat there through Christmas Day, through New Year's, through the beginning of 2001, until George finally, gently, took them upstairs to Mikey's room, where they joined the growing collection of birthday and holiday gifts we kept buying for a little boy who wasn't there to receive them. The first anniversary of their disappearance hit like a physical blow. March 25th, 2001. 1 full year of searching, hoping, crying, raging, and we were no closer to finding them than we'd been on day 1. Detective Morrison had moved to a different department, and our case had been reassigned to a detective who was polite but clearly overwhelmed with newer, more active cases. The file got thicker, but the leads didn't improve. I started having nightmares. Mikey crying for me, his voice echoing through endless hallways I could never find the end of. Becca's face at the window of a passing car, her mouth forming the word "help" that I couldn't hear. Derek's calm voice on the phone, over and over, "I'll be there in 20 minutes to pick up my son," while I stood frozen, unable to stop what was coming. George found me one night, 3 in the morning, sitting in Mikey's room in the dark, holding the Superman bedspread and sobbing. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside me and pulled me into his arms, and we cried together for the first time since it had happened. "We're losing each other," I whispered against his shoulder. "I can't lose you too. I can't." "You won't," he promised, but his voice was rough with tears and exhaustion. "We'll get through this, somehow." We started going to therapy, both separately and together. My therapist, Dr. Ellen Park, was a patient woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and grief. She helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a kind of death without closure, an ambiguous loss that's often harder to process than a definite ending. "You're allowed to grieve," she told me during one session. "You're allowed to be angry and scared and devastated, but you also have to find a way to keep living, because if they do come back, they need you to be whole enough to help them heal." If they come back. Such small words carrying such enormous weight. Not when. If. I started going to the cemetery, even though there were no graves to visit. I'd found a quiet spot under an oak tree, and I'd sit there and talk to Mikey like he could hear me. Told him about the weather, about the neighbors, about how much I missed him. Told Becca that I loved her, that I wasn't angry, that I just wanted to know she was safe. Some people probably thought I was crazy, an old woman talking to an empty patch of grass. I didn't care. George went back to work part-time, volunteering at the local library, needing something to do with his hands and mind that wasn't searching for 2 people who didn't want to be found. Or rather, didn't want Derek to be found, because I refused to believe Becca had gone willingly. She would have called. She would have let me know she was okay. The silence meant one of two things. Either Derek had complete control over her, or something far worse had happened. I couldn't let myself think about the worse option. Couldn't entertain the possibility that my daughter and grandson might not be alive, that Derek might have done something that left me searching for ghosts. So I focused on the control theory. Derek was keeping them isolated, probably in another country, possibly under assumed names. Becca was waiting for an opportunity to reach out, to escape, to come home. It was the only narrative I could live with. Years 2 and 3 passed in a blur of continued searching and forced routine. I learned to function, to go to work, to smile when appropriate, to pretend I was okay when people asked. But underneath, I was screaming every single second of every single day. Mikey would be 7 now, then 8. I'd see children those ages and try to imagine what he looked like. Had he lost all his baby fat? Did his voice sound different? Had Derek changed his name, his hair color, his entire identity? Would I even recognize him if I passed him on the street? The support group kept me tethered to sanity. Barely. We celebrated small victories together, mourned setbacks, held on to each other through the dark times. The woman from Minnesota, Patricia, became a particular friend. Her daughter had been found after 9 years, alive and safe, living under a fake name in Arizona. The reunion was difficult, Patricia told me. Her daughter was 16 now, had been 7 when taken, and barely remembered her mother. "But she's home," Patricia said, tears of joy and pain mixing together. "She's home, and we're working through it, and that's what matters." Her story gave me hope. If it could happen for her, maybe it could happen for me too. I just had to keep waiting, keep searching, keep hoping. George's health started declining around year 4. Nothing major at first, just a persistent cough he couldn't shake. Fatigue that sleep didn't help. I dragged him to the doctor, worried it was the stress manifesting physically. The diagnosis was heart disease, years of high blood pressure and stress that had damaged his arteries. He needed medication, lifestyle changes, rest. "I'm fine," he insisted, but he wasn't. None of us were fine. We kept Mikey's room exactly as it had been. By now it was full of presents for a child aging through elementary school years we weren't witnessing. I kept buying clothes in sizes I guessed he'd need, toys and books age-appropriate for whatever year we were in. The room became a time capsule of hope and delusion, both things existing simultaneously. Detective Morrison, who'd moved back to missing persons after a stint in robbery, would call every few months with updates that weren't really updates. A possible sighting in Oregon that turned out to be a different family. A credit card with Derek's name that ended up being someone else entirely. A child matching Mikey's description in a school photo that looked similar but wasn't him. Each false lead was a fresh wound. Hope surging, then crashing, leaving me more broken than before. But I couldn't stop myself from hoping. Hope was all I had. Now, I need to pause here and ask you something. If this story is hitting you, if you're feeling the weight of these years of searching and hoping, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button and leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking, what you would do in this situation. And let me know what city or country you're watching from. These stories connect us across distances, remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Your support means everything and helps more people find these real stories of resilience and hope. Year 5 brought a devastating blow that nearly broke me completely. George had a massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning in April 2005. I found him in the garden, collapsed among the tomato plants he'd been trying to stake, his face gray, his breathing shallow. The ambulance seemed to take forever. I held his hand, begging him to hold on, pleading with a God I wasn't sure was listening to not take him from me too. I'd already lost my daughter and grandson. I couldn't lose my husband. I couldn't survive that. George made it through the heart attack, but the doctor was blunt. Significant damage to the heart muscle. He needs to reduce stress, take his medications religiously, and make major lifestyle changes. Another attack like this will likely be fatal. Reduce stress. I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a sob. How could we reduce stress when we were living with the constant agony of not knowing where our family was? George came home from the hospital diminished, both physically and emotionally. He moved slower, tired easily, needed help with things he'd always done independently. I became his caretaker on top of everything else, and while I'd do anything for him, the added responsibility meant less time for searching, less energy for the fight. For the first time, I felt the hope starting to crack. 5 years was a long time. Mikey was 10 now, a full decade old, half his life lived away from us. Did he even remember me? Did Derek tell him we were dead? Did he have a new name, a new identity, a new life where grandparents named Dot and George didn't exist? The nightmares got worse. Now they included George dying while I was out searching, leaving me completely alone. I'd wake up gasping, reaching for him in the dark, needing to feel his heartbeat to know he was still there. "Maybe we should accept that we might not find them," George said one night, 6 months after his heart attack. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, both of us exhausted. "Maybe we need to find a way to let go." "I can't." My voice broke. "I can't let go. What if tomorrow is the day? What if we give up and that's when she calls?" Then she calls and we celebrate. "But Dot, this is killing us. Literally, in my case. We have to find a way to live with this, not just survive it." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing and accepting are different things. How do you let go of your child, your grandchild? How do you stop hoping when hope is the only thing keeping you breathing? Dr. Park helped me work through what she called complicated grief. We talked about maintaining hope while also accepting reality, about honoring Mikey and Becca's absence while still living a full life. It sounded good in theory. In practice, it meant crying through most sessions and feeling guilty for any moment of happiness I experienced. "Guilt serves no purpose here," Dr. Park said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. Derek is responsible for this, not you. You're allowed to laugh, to enjoy things, to have good days without it being a betrayal." But it felt like betrayal. How could I enjoy a beautiful day when I didn't know if Mikey was seeing the same sky? How could I laugh at a joke when Becca might be crying somewhere, desperate to come home? The 6th anniversary passed, then the 7th. George's health stabilized, but never fully recovered. We settled into a new normal, one neither of us wanted but had to accept. I cut back my hours at work, eventually retiring at 62 so I could take care of George and continue searching from home. The internet became my new tool. I'd learned to use computers at work, and now I spent hours every day scouring social media, missing persons databases, news articles from around the country and the world. I created accounts on every platform, joined groups for missing children, followed leads that usually went nowhere. One day in late 2007, I found a Facebook profile that made my heart stop. The profile picture was blurry, but it showed a teenage boy with dark hair and hazel eyes that looked so much like Mikey could have looked. The account was under the name Michael Stevens, listed as living in Seattle, Washington. My hands shook as I sent a message. "Hi, I know this might sound strange, but are you originally from Iowa? I'm looking for my grandson, who went missing in 2000. I waited for a response for 3 days, checking every hour, my hope building to painful levels. When the reply finally came, it shattered me. "Sorry, I was born and raised in Seattle, never been to Iowa. Good luck finding your grandson." Not him. Of course not him. Just another dark-haired boy, another false lead, another broken piece of my heart scattered on the floor. But I kept searching. What else could I do? By year 10, I'd developed a routine that kept me functional. Mornings were for physical tasks, house cleaning, errands, taking care of George. Afternoons were for searching, online databases, making calls, following up on any leads. Evenings were for grief, allowing myself to feel everything I'd been holding back all day, usually in Mikey's room, surrounded by a decade worth of unopened presents. George worried about me. I could see it in his eyes, but he'd learned not to try to stop me. This was how I coped. This was how I survived. And as long as I was still functioning, still taking care of him and myself, he let me have my afternoons and evenings of obsessive searching and grieving. Mikey turned 15 in 2010. 15. The age when kids start learning to drive, thinking about their futures, becoming young adults. I bought him a book about getting your learner's permit in Iowa, knowing he'd never read it, knowing he might be using a completely different name in a completely different state or country. But I bought it anyway and added it to the pile. The support group had shrunk over the years. Some people had found their missing loved ones. Some had received the worst news possible. Some had just stopped coming, too tired to keep hoping. Patricia was still there, though her daughter was an adult now, living on her own, still working through the trauma of having been taken. We'd become close friends, calling each other on hard days, celebrating each other's birthdays since our families couldn't. Sometimes I think the not knowing would have been easier, Patricia admitted once. At least then I could hold on to the fantasy that she was perfect and happy somewhere. The reality is messy and hard and nothing like I imagined. I understood what she meant, but I'd still take messy reality over this endless void any day. Year 12 brought an unexpected development. A true crime podcast decided to feature Becca and Mikey's case. The host, a young woman named Jennifer, had contacted me asking for permission to do an episode about parental abduction. I agreed, desperate for any publicity that might generate new leads. The episode aired in November 2012, and for a few weeks, our case was hot again. Tips flooded in from listeners across the country. Most were well-meaning, but useless. A few were cruel, people claiming to be Becca or Mikey asking for money. But one tip stood out. A woman in Florida called saying she'd worked with a man matching Derek's description at a restaurant in Tampa around 2005-2006. He'd had a young boy with him sometimes, maybe 10 or 11 years old, called him son, but the relationship seemed strained. The boy had looked sad, the woman said. Lost. Detective Morrison followed up, but the restaurant had closed. The man had moved on, and there was no way to verify if it had been Derek. Still, it was something. A possible sighting, a possible location, more than we'd had in years. I became obsessed with Florida, started searching Tampa news archives, school records, anything I could access online. George tried to calm me down, remind me it might not have been them, but I couldn't help it. This was the first real lead in over a decade. I had to follow it. Nothing came of it. Of course nothing came of it. The trail was 7 years cold by the time I started looking. But for a few months, I had hope again, real, burning hope. And when it fizzled out, I was left more hollow than before. George passed away in January 2015, another heart attack, massive and quick in his sleep. I woke up next to him already gone, his hand still in mine, his face peaceful for the first time in years. He was 78 years old, and I truly believe the stress of losing Becca and Mikey had stolen at least a decade of life from him. I was 67 and suddenly completely alone. No husband, no daughter, no grandson, no family at all except for some distant cousins I barely knew. The house felt enormous and empty, echoing with memories of life that used to fill it. The funeral was small. A few friends, some former co-workers, Patricia from the support group. I stood at George's grave and wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. He deserved to meet his grandson again, deserved to know that Becca was safe, deserved an ending to this story that wasn't just death and unanswered questions. But life doesn't work that way. Life doesn't care about fairness or what people deserve. I almost gave up then, almost let the grief and loneliness consume me, almost stopped searching. Almost accepted that I'd die without ever knowing what happened to them. Dr. Park had retired, and I couldn't bring myself to start over with a new therapist. The support group felt hollow without George to come home to and debrief with. What was the point of any of it? But then I'd go into Mikey's room and see 20 years' worth of presents. See the Superman bedspread still tucked in tight. See the photos of a little boy who'd been 5 years old when the world stole him from me. And I couldn't quit. I just couldn't. So I kept going, kept searching, kept hoping against all logic and reason and evidence that someday, somehow, I'd get an answer. Years 15 through 20 passed in a blur of routine and monotony. I downsized to a smaller house on the other side of town, unable to maintain the ranch on Maple Street alone. I took Mikey's room with me, recreated it exactly in the new place, continued buying presents for a grandson who was now in his 20s. The world changed around me. Technology advanced, social media exploded. The ways people could disappear and the ways people could be found both multiplied. I tried to keep up, learned new platforms, new search methods, but I was in my 70s now, and the learning curve was steep. Mikey turned 25 in March 2020, a quarter of a century since he'd vanished. He'd been gone longer than I'd known him, 5 times longer than the 5 years I'd had with him. The math made me sick. I threw him a birthday party anyway, just me and Patricia in my little house, a cake with 25 candles, presents I'd bought imagining what a 25-year-old might want. Books, gift cards, practical things for a young man starting his life. Patricia cried with me as I blew out the candles for Mikey, as we sang happy birthday to someone who wasn't there. "You're the strongest person I know," Patricia said, hugging me tight. But I didn't feel strong. I felt tired. Tired of hoping, tired of searching, tired of living in this limbo between life and death, presence and absence. The pandemic hit, and suddenly the whole world was experiencing the isolation and fear I'd been living with for 20 years. People complained about not seeing their families, and I wanted to scream that I hadn't seen mine in 2 decades. But I didn't. I just isolated in my house, searched online since there was nothing else to do anyway, and waited for the world to return to some semblance of normal. By year 23, I'd accepted that I would probably die without knowing. It was a cold, hard acceptance, not peaceful, but pragmatic. I was 73 years old, not in the best health, definitely not getting younger. If Mikey was going to find me, it would have to be soon. And the chances of that happening after 23 years of silence were essentially zero. I started getting my affairs in order, made a will leaving everything to a charity for missing children, wrote letters to Becca and Mikey that I left with my lawyer to be given to them if they ever surfaced, picked out my burial plot next to George, prepared for the end. But God or fate or whatever force runs this universe had different plans. Because on that Thursday evening in September 2025, 25 years and 6 months after my grandson disappeared, there was a knock on my door. And when I opened it, a man with hazel eyes and dark hair stood there claiming to be Michael, claiming to be the little boy I'd lost. And my entire world, already broken into 1,000 pieces, shattered and reformed all at once. I stood there staring at this stranger on my porch, my hand still gripping the doorframe, my mind trying to process what he'd just said. 25 years of searching, hoping, dying a little bit every day, and now someone was standing here claiming to be Mikey. But this wasn't Mikey. Mikey was 5 years old with scraped knees and a gap-toothed smile. This was a man, 30 years old, with a beard and worry lines around his eyes and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of whatever life he'd lived without me. "I know this is a shock," he said, his voice gentle, understanding. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I have things I can show you. Proof. If you'll give me a chance." My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded, stepped back, let him into my small living room. He moved past me carefully, like he was afraid I might bolt or collapse, and honestly, either was possible. We sat in my living room, me on the edge of my recliner, him on the couch, with 10 feet of space and 25 years of questions between us. "How?" I finally managed, my voice raw. "How do I know? How do I know you're really him?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a photograph, its edges soft from age and handling. He held it out to me with trembling fingers. I took it with equally trembling hands. It was Mikey's 5th birthday party. Our backyard. The Superman decorations. A little boy blowing out candles with pure joy on his face. And there, behind him, were George and me, beaming like we held the whole world in our arms. I couldn't breathe. This photo had been taken at the party, the last time I saw Mikey. There had been a camera. Someone must have taken pictures. But I'd never seen this one. After they disappeared, I'd searched for the camera, desperate for any photos, but Derek must have taken it with him. "I've carried this for 25 years, the man said, his voice breaking. "It's been in my wallet, in my pocket, under my pillow. It's the only thing I had from before. The only proof that my life before 10 years old actually happened." 10 years old? I looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, and I could see him steeling himself for whatever came next. Can I tell you everything? The whole story? It's going to take a while, and some of it is hard to hear, but I think you need to know it all. I nodded, still clutching the photograph, this fragile piece of proof that the impossible might actually be happening. "My name is Michael James Morrison," he began, and the sound of that name, the name I'd whispered 1,000,000 times into the void, nearly undid me. "I was 5 years old when my father took my mother and me away from Iowa. I don't remember a lot from before that night. My memories are fragmented, like pieces of a dream I can't quite hold on to. But I remember you." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. "You remember me?" I remember sitting at a kitchen counter, chocolate on my face, someone with soft hands and kind eyes calling me sweet names. I remember a swing in a backyard, the feeling of flying. I remember feeling safe and loved. And I remember that photo being taken, remember the Superman cape I was wearing, remember blowing out candles and making a wish. "What did you wish for?" The question came out automatically, something I used to ask him every birthday. He smiled, sad and distant. "I wished that we could stay happy forever, that nothing would ever change." He paused. "I guess wishes don't always come true." I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to verify he was real, but I was afraid if I moved, the spell would break and he'd vanish like smoke. "My father told me you were dead," Michael continued, his voice hardening. "He told me that you and Grandpa George died in a car accident, that we had to move away because the memories were too painful for my mom. I was 5. I believed him. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Your mother. Where is Becca? Is she?" I couldn't finish the question. Pain crossed his face, deep and old. "She's alive. She's in California, living in a care facility. She has early onset Alzheimer's. She barely recognizes me anymore." The room spun. Becca was alive. My daughter was alive. Sick, fading, but alive. 25 years I'd searched, and she'd been alive this whole time. "Tell me everything," I whispered. "Please, I need to know everything." So he did. For the next 3 hours, Michael told me a story that broke my heart over and over while simultaneously putting pieces of it back together. Derek had indeed taken them that night, driven straight through to Chicago, then taken a bus to Toronto. He'd had fake passports made, fake identities prepared. In Canada, they became the Stevens family, Derek, Rachel, and Michael Stevens. Derek got a job working construction under the table, paid in cash, no paper trail. Becca wasn't allowed to work, wasn't allowed to have friends, wasn't allowed any contact with the outside world. "He told her you guys didn't want us anymore," Michael said, anger and grief mixing in his voice. "Said you told him to take us away and never come back. Mom didn't believe him at first, tried to call you, tried to escape. But he had ways of controlling her." I didn't ask for details. The pain in Michael's eyes told me enough. They lived in Toronto for 3 years, constantly moving between apartments. Derek paranoid that someone would recognize them. When Michael was 8, they moved to Montana. New names again, new identities. By the time he was 10, Becca had started showing signs of mental deterioration that would later be diagnosed as early-onset Alzheimer's, though Derek refused to get her proper medical care. "I think the stress of it all broke something in her brain," Michael said quietly. "The constant fear, the isolation, the abuse. She started forgetting things, getting confused. And I was just a kid, trying to take care of her while Dad worked or drank or raged about whatever had set him off that day." When Michael was 15, living in Nevada under yet another set of false names, Becca had a severe episode. She wandered away from their apartment, was found by police 3 days later, dehydrated and confused, unable to remember where she lived or even her own name. Social services got involved, and for the first time, the carefully constructed house of lies Derek had built started to crumble. "They ran our names, our information, and nothing matched up," Michael explained. The social worker started asking questions Derek couldn't answer. That's when he ran again, but this time, he left us behind. Derek had vanished in the middle of the night, taking whatever cash he had, leaving Becca in a hospital and Michael in a foster home. Just abandoned them like they were garbage he no longer needed. Social services tried to piece together who they really were, but the false identities were so layered, so complicated, it took months. Eventually, they figured out that Rachel Stevens was actually Rebecca Morrison, reported missing from Iowa in 2000. But Becca's memory was so damaged by that point, she couldn't provide any useful information. She didn't remember her real name, didn't remember Iowa, didn't remember George or me. They asked her about her family, about her life before, Michael said, his voice heavy with grief. She looked at them with these empty eyes and said she didn't have a family, that she'd always been alone. Child Services had tried to notify family, but their records showed Rebecca Morrison's parents as deceased, information Derek must have planted somehow. Michael was put into foster care at 15, and Becca was moved to a care facility specializing in early Alzheimer's patients. "I bounced around foster homes for 3 years," Michael continued. "Some were okay, some were terrible. I aged out of the system at 18, got a job, tried to figure out who I was. Because I wasn't really Michael Stevens, but I also wasn't sure if I was Michael Morrison anymore either." For the next 12 years, he'd worked various jobs, put himself through community college, tried to build a life out of the wreckage Derek had left behind. He visited Becca when he could. Though she rarely recognized him, her mind locked in a past that included neither her real life nor the false one Derek had created. "About 6 months ago, I was going through some of Mom's things that social services had stored," Michael said. "Boxes of clothes and books and random stuff from when they found her. And in the bottom of one box, I found this." He pulled out another photograph. This one of Becca and me, taken when she was maybe 10 years old. We were at a park, her on the swings, me pushing her, both of us laughing. On the back, in my handwriting, it said, "Becca and Mom, summer 1982. I saw this, and something clicked, like a memory trying to surface. I'd seen this photo before, years ago when I was little, and I remembered a woman, someone who loved me, someone who made me feel safe." He looked at me with eyes so much like Becca's it hurt. "I remembered you." He'd started searching then, using the names on the back of the photo, digging through old records and news archives. He found articles about the disappearance, about the search, about George's death. He found the podcast episode from 2012. And finally, he found me. "I've been sitting in my car outside your house for 3 hours, he admitted, working up the courage to knock, afraid you wouldn't believe me, afraid you wouldn't want me, afraid of getting rejected by the only family I have left. I couldn't hold back anymore. I stood up, crossed the space between us, and pulled this stranger who was my grandson into my arms. He was so much bigger than the little boy I remembered, solid and real and here, but when he wrapped his arms around me and started crying, I felt that 5-year-old boy underneath, the one who'd wished we could stay happy forever. We held each other and cried for everything we'd lost, for all the years stolen from us, for George, who would never know we'd been found, for Becca, who couldn't remember us anymore. We cried for the life that should have been and the life that was, and for the impossibility of getting back what Derek had taken. When we finally pulled apart, I held his face in my hands and really looked at him. Yes, there was Mikey in there, in the hazel eyes, in the shape of his jaw, in the way his eyebrows arched when he was uncertain. But there was also so much I'd missed. The teen years, the transformation into adulthood, the experiences that had carved themselves into his features. "You grew up," I said, stating the obvious, laughing through tears. "I'm sorry it took so long to find you," he replied. "You found me, that's what matters. You found me." We talked through the night, him filling in details, me asking a million questions, both of us trying to bridge a quarter-century gap with words that could never be adequate. He showed me photos on his phone of Becca in the care facility, her eyes distant, her body frail. She was only 53, but looked 70, the disease and years of stress aging her prematurely. "Can I see her?" I asked. "Would they let me visit?" "I'm her legal guardian now," Michael said. "Since she can't make decisions for herself, I can authorize visits, but Grandma—" He paused over the word, testing it out. "You need to know she won't recognize you. She doesn't really recognize me most days. Her mind is in some place we can't reach." It didn't matter. She was alive. My daughter was alive. I needed to see her, even if she didn't know who I was. "I don't care if she doesn't remember. I remember enough for both of us." Michael smiled, and for just a second I saw my little Mikey in that smile. "I thought you might say that." We made plans. He lived in San Diego, where Becca's facility was located. I would fly out there next week, meet him at his apartment, and we'd go visit her together. We'd start the process of reconnecting, of building whatever relationship was possible after 25 years of absence. "What about Derek?" I asked, the question I'd been avoiding. "Did they ever find him?" Michael's expression darkened. "No, he vanished completely. I've looked, hired private investigators with money I couldn't afford to spend, checked databases and records. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth." "Good," I said, with venom I didn't try to hide. "I hope he's dead. I hope he died alone and afraid and got exactly what he deserved." Michael didn't argue. We sat there in shared anger at the man who'd destroyed so much, stolen so many years, caused so much irreparable damage. If Derek walked through my door right now, I honestly didn't know if I'd call the police or handle things myself. As dawn started breaking, painting my living room in soft pink light, Michael stood to leave. "I should get to my hotel, get some sleep. Can I come back tomorrow? We have so much more to talk about." "Come for breakfast," I said immediately. 9 o'clock, I'll make chocolate chip pancakes." He froze, looking at me with wonder. "You remember that? That I liked chocolate chip pancakes?" "I remember everything," I told him. "Every single thing." After he left, I sat in my living room holding that photograph from the birthday party, tracing the faces of people who'd been happy once, before the world fell apart. George and I, young and hopeful. Becca, healthy and whole. Mikey, 5 years old, with his entire life ahead of him. We couldn't get those people back. The innocent grandmother who thought bad things happened to other families. The healthy daughter with her mind intact. The little boy who'd known nothing but love. They were gone, casualties of Derek's cruelty and the relentless march of time. But we could build something new. Michael and me, and in whatever way was possible, Becca too. We could take these broken pieces and create something that, while not the same as what was lost, could still be beautiful and meaningful. I went to Mikey's room, that shrine to a childhood frozen in time, and looked at 25 years of unopened presents. Some of them were ridiculous now. A learner's permit book for a 30-year-old man. Toys for a child who was an adult. Clothes that would never fit, but some could still be given. The books, the gift cards, the sentimental items I'd chosen hoping they'd convey my love across the void. I'd give them to Michael tomorrow over chocolate chip pancakes, and we'd laugh and cry together over the absurdity and tragedy and miracle of it all. The next morning I was up at 6, despite having been awake all night. Adrenaline and disbelief and joy all mixed together made sleep impossible. I cleaned the kitchen, prepared pancake batter from scratch the way I used to when Mikey was little, set the table with my good plates. Patricia called at 7, like she did every Friday morning. We had a routine, checking in with each other, making sure we were both still standing. "Dot, how are you today?" "Patricia, you won't believe what happened." I told her everything, words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. The knock on the door, the photograph, Michael's story, all of it. She cried with me, happy tears this time. "I told you," she said through her sobs. "I told you to never give up. Oh, Dot, this is a miracle." "It's not the miracle I wanted," I admitted. "Becca's sick, George is gone, so many years were stolen. But it's something. It's more than I had yesterday." "That's all we can ever ask for," she said wisely. "More than we had yesterday." Michael arrived exactly at 9, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. I hugged him at the door, still not quite believing he was real, then led him to the kitchen where the pancakes were waiting. We ate and talked, and with each minute, with each story shared, the gap between us narrowed just slightly. He told me about his job as an electrician, his small apartment in San Diego, his attempts at relationships that never quite worked because he couldn't fully trust anyone after Derek. I told him about George, about the decades of searching, about the support group and the false leads, and the nights I sat in his childhood room talking to a little boy who wasn't there. He cried when I told him about George's death, mourning the grandfather he barely remembered. "He never stopped looking for you," I said. "Right up until the end, he believed we'd find you. He'd want to know that you're okay, that you survived." "I wish I could have told him," Michael whispered. "Wish I could have said thank you for not giving up." "You just did," I told him. "Somehow, wherever he is, I think he knows." After breakfast, I took Michael to the room I'd kept for him. He stood in the doorway, staring at the Superman bedspread, the shelves full of toys and books, the mountain of wrapped presents spanning 2.5 decades. "You kept it," he said, his voice barely audible. "All these years, you kept my room." "I had to believe you'd come home. This was my way of believing." He walked slowly around the room, touching things gently. The action figures, the books, the photos on the wall of a little boy he barely was anymore. When he got to the pile of presents, he sank to the floor, overwhelmed. "You can open them," I said. "Some are silly now, but some I think you'll like." We spent the next hour opening 25 years' worth of birthdays and Christmases. He laughed at the learner's permit book, cried over the card I'd written for his 16th birthday, talking about what a wonderful young man I knew he'd become. He kept every single thing, even the toys clearly meant for a child, because they represented something more than their function. They represented love that persisted through absence, hope that survived when it shouldn't have, a grandmother who refused to forget. Over the next few days, we made plans. I'd fly to San Diego in 2 weeks. Michael would take time off work, and we'd spend a week together. He'd show me his life, introduce me to his friends, take me to see Becca. We'd start the slow process of weaving our lives back together. "What do I call you?" he asked on the 3rd day, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "Grandma feels strange after all this time. What feels right to you?" He thought about it, his face serious. "When I look at that birthday photo, I hear a little boy's voice in my head calling you Gamma Dot." Can I? Would it be okay if I called you that? My heart swelled so big I thought it might burst. Nothing would make me happier. The 2 weeks until my trip passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I bought new clothes, got my hair done, tried to look like a grandmother worth finding. Patricia helped me pick out gifts for Michael's apartment, things to make his space more homey, more connected to family. The support group threw me a celebration dinner. Everyone crying happy tears over the miracle none of them had fully believed could happen. "You give us all hope," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "If it can happen for you, maybe it can happen for us too." I flew to San Diego on a Wednesday morning in October. Michael picked me up at the airport, and seeing him there, holding a sign that said, "Welcome home, Gamma Dot," made me cry all over again. His apartment was small but clean, filled with photographs he'd printed and framed from our week together. Us eating pancakes, us in his childhood room, us on my porch, creating new memories to replace the stolen ones. That evening, we drove to the care facility where Becca lived. It was a nice place, clean and well-staffed, with gardens and common areas where residents could sit. Michael had warned me multiple times that Becca wouldn't know me, but I still wasn't prepared for the reality. She sat in a chair by the window, staring out at nothing, her dark hair now streaked with gray, her face lined in ways that had nothing to do with age. She was 53 and looked ancient, worn down by disease and years of abuse and fear. "Mom?" Michael said softly, kneeling beside her chair. "I brought someone to meet you." She turned slowly, her eyes taking a long time to focus. "Hello?" she said politely, the voice of someone meeting a stranger. "Hi, Becca," I said, my voice breaking. "It's Mom. It's Dorothy." No recognition, no spark of memory. She just smiled that pleasant, empty smile of someone trying to be polite without understanding why. We stayed for an hour. I talked to her about when she was little, about her childhood, about the daughter she'd been. She listened with detached interest, like I was telling her stories about someone else entirely. When I mentioned Mikey's 5th birthday, the Superman theme, the chocolate cake, she just nodded pleasantly. "That sounds nice," she said. "I like chocolate." "I know you do, baby," I whispered. "I know you do." As we left, Michael put his arm around me while I cried. "I'm sorry, I know it's hard." "Does it ever get easier?" "No," he said honestly. "But we keep coming anyway, because even if she doesn't remember, we do, and that has to count for something." We fell into a routine during that week. Mornings together in his apartment, talking and sharing stories. Afternoons visiting Becca, sitting with her even though she didn't know us. Evenings exploring San Diego, him showing me his favorite places, the life he'd built despite everything. On my last night there, we sat on the beach watching the sunset, and I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Do you think you'll ever forgive Derek for what he did?" Michael was quiet for a long time, watching the waves crash against the shore. "I don't think forgiveness is possible for something this big. He didn't just take years from us. He took my mother's mind, my grandfather's health, your peace. He destroyed lives and didn't care. How do you forgive that?" "I don't think you do," I agreed. "I think you just learn to carry it without letting it destroy what's left." "Is that what you've done?" I considered. "I'm trying. Some days are better than others." We sat there in comfortable silence. A grandmother and grandson rebuilding a relationship across a chasm of lost time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what should have been. But it was real and precious and worth fighting for. Flying home was hard. Leaving Michael felt wrong, even though I knew I'd see him again soon. We'd already planned Christmas together, him flying to Iowa, the first holiday we'd share in 25 years. I was going to make it perfect, fill my house with decorations and food and love, give us the celebration we'd been denied for so long. But more than that, I was going to keep showing up, for Michael, for Becca, For the family we were rebuilding piece by broken piece. Because that's what love does. It shows up. It persists. It refuses to give up, even when giving up would be easier. The months since finding Michael have been a strange mix of joy and grief. Joy for what we've found, grief for what we've lost. Becca's condition continues to deteriorate. Michael calls me every Sunday, the tradition Becca and I used to have, and we talk for hours. Sometimes about the past, sometimes about the present, always about how grateful we are to have found each other. I've met his girlfriend, Amanda, a kind woman who knows his whole story and loves him anyway. They're talking about marriage, about starting a family, and the thought of being a great-grandmother fills me with a bittersweet joy. Children who will never know their great-grandfather George, who will never really know their grandmother Becca, but who will be loved fiercely by those of us who remain. Michael is in therapy now, working through the trauma of his childhood, the abandonment, the years of unstable housing and constant fear. It's hard work, he tells me, facing all the damage Derek did. But he's doing it because he wants to be healthy for Amanda, for their future children, for himself. I've closed down Mikey's room finally, packed away the toys and the presents, keeping a few special items but donating most to children who can actually use them. The room is now a proper guest room, ready for when Michael visits, decorated with photos of us together now, not shrines to a past we can't reclaim. The support group still meets, and I still go. But my role has changed. I'm no longer the one searching. I'm the miracle story, the proof that sometimes, against all odds, people come home. It's a responsibility I take seriously, offering hope when I can, realistic expectations when I must. Patricia and I talk about writing a book together, sharing our experiences with parental abduction and the journey of reunion. Maybe it could help other families, provide a roadmap for the impossible task of reconnecting after years of forced separation. I think about Derek sometimes, wonder where he is, if he's alive, if he ever thinks about the lives he destroyed. Part of me hopes he's suffering, that karma has caught up with him in some way. But mostly, I try not to give him space in my mind. He's taken enough from me. I won't give him my present and future too. The truth is, this story doesn't have a happy ending. Not in the traditional sense. George is gone. Becca's mind is gone. 25 years of memories were stolen and can never be recovered. Michael and I are building a relationship, but it's not the one we should have had. It's not grandmother and grandson who've known each other his whole life. It's two people bonded by blood and loss, trying to create something new from broken pieces. But it's also not a sad ending, because Michael found me. Against impossible odds, across 25 years and thousands of miles, he found his way home. We have Sunday phone calls and holiday plans and inside jokes we're creating together. We have visits to Becca where we sit with her even though she doesn't know us, because showing up matters even when it's hard. We have each other, and in a world that tried very hard to make sure we didn't, that's not nothing. That's everything. So now I want to tell you, if you're listening to this and you're going through something impossible, something that seems like it will never get better, something that's stolen your joy and your peace and your hope, don't give up. I know that's easier said than done. I know there were 1,000 times I wanted to quit, wanted to stop searching, wanted to accept that some things are lost forever. But here's what I learned. Hope isn't the same as denial. You can hope for the best while accepting that the worst might happen. You can keep searching while also learning to live in the present. You can grieve what's lost while celebrating what remains. For 25 years, I lived in that balance. I searched for Mikey and Becca while also trying to take care of George and myself. I hoped they'd come home while also accepting they might not. I kept their rooms ready while also continuing to live my life. It wasn't perfect. There were years I was barely functional, consumed by grief and guilt and rage. But I survived. And when Michael finally knocked on my door, I was still here to answer it. If you're a grandmother like me, if you're going through something that seems impossible, Remember, you're stronger than you think. You've survived everything life has thrown at you so far. You can survive this too. It might not look the way you want it to. The ending might not be the happy ever after you dreamed of. But you can survive it. And you can find moments of joy and connection, even in the middle of the hardest chapters. Find your support system, whether it's a group like mine, or friends, or family, or a therapist. Don't try to carry it alone. Accept help when it's offered. Be gentle with yourself on the bad days. Celebrate the small victories, and never, ever give up hope, even when hope seems foolish. Because here's the thing about hope. It doesn't have to be realistic to be valuable. For 25 years, hoping to find Mikey kept me alive. It gave me a reason to get up every morning, a purpose beyond just existing. And when the impossible finally happened, when he actually found me, that hope was vindicated in a way I never could have predicted. Your hope might not end in a reunion. It might not end in the outcome you're praying for. But it will keep you going until you find whatever comes next. And that's worth something. That's worth everything. To other grandmothers who've lost grandchildren, whether to parental abduction or estrangement or any other reason, I see you. I know your pain. I know the birthdays you celebrate alone, the holidays that feel hollow, the constant ache of missing someone who's still alive somewhere. I know the guilt, the what-ifs, the way you replay every moment looking for where you could have done something different. It's not your fault. Whatever happened, whatever choices led to this, you loved them the best way you knew how. That has to be enough, because it's all any of us can do. And to anyone dealing with Alzheimer's in a loved one, whether early onset like Becca, or the more common later life version, it's okay to grieve them even while they're still alive. You're losing them by degrees, watching them slip away into a place you can't follow. That's a unique kind of torture, and you're allowed to feel every feeling that comes with it. But you're also allowed to find moments of connection, even if they're different than before. Becca doesn't remember me as her mother, but she smiles when we sing old songs together. She doesn't know Michael is her son, but she seems calmer when he holds her hand. The relationship isn't what it was, but it's still something. It still matters. One of the things therapy taught me is that there's no timeline for grief. People expect you to move on after a certain amount of time, to get over it and return to normal. But there is no normal after loss this big. There's only learning to carry it, finding ways to function around the hole that will never completely fill. Some days I'm fine. I can talk about Mikey's disappearance matter-of-factly, can share the story without breaking down, can even laugh about some of the absurdities of the long search. Other days, something small will trigger me. A little boy calling for his grandmother in a store, a Superman toy in a donation bin, a news story about a missing child, and I'm right back there, standing at my door, watching Derek take Mikey into the dark, powerless to stop it. Both versions of me are real and valid. The one who's healing and the one who's still broken. They exist simultaneously, and I've learned to let them both have space. I've also learned that forgiveness is complicated and personal. Well-meaning people told me for years that I needed to forgive Derek, that holding on to anger would only hurt me. But forgiveness isn't something you can force, and not all things deserve to be forgiven. What Derek did was unforgivable. The fact that I'm moving forward with my life doesn't mean I've absolved him of responsibility for the devastation he caused. What I have done is stop letting him take up space in my head. I don't fantasize about confronting him or getting revenge anymore. I don't lie awake wondering where he is or if he's suffering. I've put him in a box labeled finished and moved on to the parts of my life that deserve my energy and attention. That's not forgiveness, that's just survival and sanity. Now, before we finish this story, I want to ask one more favor. If this story has touched you, if it's made you think or feel or appreciate your own family, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me what you thought, what country or city you're watching from, what this story meant to you. These interactions help the channel grow and reach more people who need to hear these stories of resilience and hope. Your support means the world and helps create a community where real grandmas can share real stories about the hardest and most beautiful moments of our lives. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. It's never too late to rebuild. That's the message I want to leave you with. It's never too late to start over, to create new connections, to find hope in impossible places. I was 73 years old when Michael found me. 73, with more years behind me than ahead, with a lifetime of grief and loss already lived. And still, my story wasn't over. There were still new chapters to be written, new relationships to build, new joys to discover. If I can do it, so can you. Whatever you're facing, whatever seems impossible, whatever you've lost that you think can never be recovered, there's still time. There's still hope. The ending might not look like what you imagined, but it can still be beautiful in its own way. Michael and I will never get back the years we lost. I'll never see him graduate high school or learn to drive or go to prom. He'll never know the grandfather who loved him so much or the mother whose mind is still sharp. Those losses are real and permanent. But we have now. We have Sunday phone calls and Christmas plans and a growing relationship that's real and precious. We have Becca, diminished but alive, and the small moments of connection we can still share with her. We have Amanda and the family they're planning. A future that includes great-grandchildren who will know their great-grandmother Dot. We have survived. And sometimes, survival is the victory. To everyone listening, hold your loved ones close. Tell them you love them. Don't wait for the perfect moment to repair broken relationships or reach out to family you've lost touch with. Life is fragile and time is cruel, and we never know when someone might be taken from us. But also know that even when people are taken, even when years pass and hope seems foolish, miracles can still happen. The impossible can become possible. The lost can be found. It might take 25 years, or it might be tomorrow, but as long as you're still breathing, there's still a chance. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community, for supporting these real grandma stories, for allowing me to share the hardest and most miraculous experience of my life. I'm Dorothy Henderson, Gamma Dot to the grandson who found his way home, and I'm living proof that it's never too late for a new beginning. Never give up hope, never stop believing, never think it's too late to start over. Because it's not. It's never too late. God bless you all, and may you find your own miracles in the impossible places.